Anna came home unusually quiet. Unusually because not possessing and choosing not to possess Agnes's capacity for destroying a comfortable atmosphere, she was still too much of a female to completely conceal her mood. I asked her what was wrong and was she sure, but she refused to say and retired to her room. I just assumed that she'd had a row with Charlie, maybe even finally broken up, especially when he didn't appear the next day, and it was so unlike him to miss a Sunday. Strangely, it wasn't until I went into school again that I learned the real story. Anna and Charlie, who both attended ours, were active members of the local amateur dramatic group. This could mean meeting 3 or 4 times weekly to familiarise themselves with roles that they perform but once or twice yearly in the local community hall. But even though there were few outside their immediate families, include me out, and a usual assortment of captive pensioners who went to see them, they might still be invited down the country in the summertime to play to like-minded groups, acting as if they appreciated them. Now, apart from Charlie, there were others from our school who were involved, although mostly in the senior years. There were some, like one in our class who wasn't an actor but whose brother was, who helped with the props when he was needed, especially when they were out of town. Matthew was his name, and this is, more or less, what he told me. On the day in question, the group had put on a matinee show for their rural host, and so were free to travel back early enough, they being a theatre group, to organise flasks and goodies for a picnic along the way. Selecting what they considered to be a suitable spot, short green grass and no threatening scenery, they settled themselves down joyfully to feast on their cucumber sandwiches cut sideways and discuss the least controversial works of Shakespeare. But then Charlie, probably having done the dog on the my body, urgently felt the need to have a piss, or, in their speak, to use the loo, and was forced to dislodge himself from the jollities and set off to find it. As they'd situated themselves about the centre of a large field, he, being the modest chap that he certainly was, made for the cover of some trees over at the furthest end of it to do his business, so it was no surprise to anyone when he wasn't back in a hurry. In truth, it's doubtful that it was even noticed that he was gone at all, except maybe by Anna, and so it was that it was she who raised the alarm, but only after they'd rejarred their pickles and folded up their napkins and he still hadn't returned. Showing the tenacity of their amateurly dramatic allegiance, and not because they'd miss his guttural tones for "Yous are all very quiet up the front" on the bus on the way home, these conscientious, mostly young folk, promptly organised and made to find him. And did they? Charlie, not being one for the limelight, had never, in their performances to date, shown any ambition to play but the minutest of roles, considering his interests as being more in the directorial sphere. But now, completely unexpectedly, he'd found himself promoted in the field, and the leading man he'd become a creature of nightmares. Bound and gagged and stripped naked from the waist down, arms and legs splayed wide, he was lashed to a tree in the severest of fashions. But that wasn't the worst of it for him. The tragedy was that it didn't seem to bother him at all, for when the shocked crowd gathered round to observe him, it couldn't but be noticed that his little thing stood up and stared right back at them. No amateur show. Surely another production from hell.